A spy, a soldier, a diplomat, an entertainer, a man, and a woman. Somehow, this person managed to be all of the above and more. Back in France in the 18th century, a young nobleman shows up in Versailles. This is Chevalier d'Eon, and he doesn't really belong there. After all, he's just a knight from a small village in the countryside. This is the lowest level of nobility. So he should look no different than a mere peasant in the eyes of the highest ranks of society. Yet, he proves to be a talented orator who captivates the court with his charisma and his knowledge. But soon, they start wondering if the charming knight might actually be a woman. However, while everyone is busy debating about this trivial detail, they all ignore Chevalier d'Eon's true intentions. Indeed, the young noble is hungry for power, and whether they're a he or a she, what is certain is that they don't stop at nothing to achieve their objectives. Fueled by excessive ambition and a huge ego, the knight never backs down from risking their own life to prove their value. Their many achievements even earn them the praise and respect of the King of France. But Chevalier d'Eon's luck runs out when the young noble's ambition turns against the king, forcing the knight into playing a game they can only lose. But from the beginning, Chevalier d'Eon was never an ordinary person. When the knight arrived in Paris, d'Eon was only 13. He appeared as a young boy, but he looked quite frail and could have easily been mistaken for a girl. But he was studying at one of the most prestigious schools of the country, which was only allowed to boys. And from a young age, he was incredibly smart and he focused the hopes of his entire family. But what really opened him the doors of prestigious social circles was the book he wrote when he was just 24. This book was no cheesy romance, but an essay about the public administration of the country. I told you, d'Eon was never an ordinary person. So he starts going to salons and he meets some of the brightest minds and most important members of high society. But he is not intimidated. He actually proves to be quite versatile. Not only can he talk about science and philosophy, but at the same time, he also has a great sense of humor. So he fits right in with the elite. In fact, he's never felt any better. And soon, he becomes a popular and respected member of this very exclusive group. He gets invited to every party, and everyone enjoys his company. But something about the young man puzzles the high society. Despite his charming personality, he doesn't seem to have any intimate relationships with anyone. It's not exactly common for such a young man to abstain from physical pleasures, especially when he has so many women interested in him. So rumors start to spread around d'Eon's true identity. But he doesn't pay much attention to it. After all, he just got invited to Versailles. This is his chance to meet with the King of France, Louis XV, and the timing couldn't have been any better. Indeed, Louis XV is facing a stressful situation and he desperately needs talented individuals to help him out. He has heard about d'Eon's reputation and he believes that he would be perfect for this role. So at the party, the king pulls d'Eon aside and takes him to a private room. There, he tells him that he is building a team in the greatest secrets. And this team is charged with carrying out some of the most important missions for the kingdom. And he wants d'Eon to be part of it. Obviously, this is everything d'Eon could have wished for. So he gladly accepts and becomes a spy under the direct supervision of the king. And his first mission is going to be critical for the future of the kingdom. You see, war is looming in Europe, and France must do everything possible to prevent Russia from joining the enemy. But turning Russia into an ally seems impossible. Louis XV has already sent many messengers to Russia, but they all came back with nothing to show for it. And it's not surprising. Elizabeth, the Empress of Russia, is known for her bad temper and for being extremely difficult to approach. Even her closest friends and advisors cannot contradict her without risking their lives. As a result, it has been over 8 years since France was able to establish any kind of communication with Russia. So it's not an exaggeration to say that Deon's first mission is also the kingdom's last hope to turn the situation around. But Deon doesn't even speak a word of Russian. Worse, he doesn't know anything about their history or their culture. Yet, he remains confident. He knows that he has nothing to lose and everything to gain from this mission. So he gets on his way to Russia, but it's a long journey. He travels secretly at night, jumping from one carriage to another, and he hides during the day. Several weeks later, he finally arrives in the cold and humid city of St. Petersburg in Russia. And before even thinking about approaching the Empress, the first step is going to find a way to get into the royal palace. So he gets to work and learns as much information as he can about the Empress. What makes it easier is that nobles all throughout Europe speak French, so there isn't actually much of a language barrier. And finally, he finds a very important piece of information. Apparently, the Empress loved luxury products imported from France. Soon, Deon manages to get in touch with the merchant who provides French products to the Russian nobility. And through the merchant, he meets a very important Russian noble who turns out to be favorable to an alliance with France. This incredible strike of luck opens him the doors to the royal palace, and from there, Deon is unstoppable. The environment in the palace is similar to the salons and receptions he attends in Paris. So Deon quickly captivates the Russian nobility, who fall in love with the French knight. He uses his charisma and his communication skills to carefully influence the Russian court's political views about France. And eventually, these ideas make their way to the Empress. But she has such a big ego that she cannot be talked into anything. She must feel like the idea comes from herself. So Deon cleverly highlights the advantages there would be to an alliance without actually talking about an alliance, especially when it comes to importing stuff from France. And finally, after almost a year in Russia, Deon gets what he came for. The Empress agrees to a peace treaty with the Kingdom of France. Deon has done the impossible. His first mission is a huge success. So when he returns to France, the king highly praises and rewards the spy. But for Deon, this is far from enough. He wants more money, more recognition, more power, just more of everything. But war has now started. So Deon becomes a soldier. More specifically, the king elevates Deon to the rank of captain so he can contribute to the war. France and Austria are fighting against England and Prussia, not to be confused with Russia, which remains neutral in the conflict thanks to Deon's previous mission. The new soldier is better known for his ability to handle words and doesn't really look like your typical military man. Although he's almost 30 years old, he remains quite short and skinny. He doesn't have a lot of muscle and, frankly, he looks like a teenager more than a man. But it's not a problem, because he isn't directly fighting on the battlefield. His work is to help the commanding officer in the execution and in the transmission of his orders to the rest of the army. Basically, Deon runs around the battlefield on his horse to tell the other soldiers what they need to do. So even though he doesn't actually fight himself, he is fully exposed to the enemy cannons and rifles. It's a very dangerous job, and he often gets injured, But as soon as he is out of the hospital, he goes back to the front line. Déon is always ready to risk his life to prove his value. However, not everyone is as courageous as him. Someday he is charged to send the order to retrieve some ammo very close to the enemy lines before they get there. The man supposed to carry out this risky mission is called de Guerchy, and remember this name because he will have a significant impact on Déon's life. But for now, they are meeting for the first time in the middle of the battlefield, and de Guerchy refuses the order. For him, it's a deadly assignment, and he doesn't intend to die in a place like this. After all, de Guerchy is not a simple soldier. He is a noble ranked much higher than Déon. But if de Guerchy doesn't want to put his life on the line, then Déon will accomplish the mission himself. De Guerchy tries to talk him out of it because of the risks, but Déon doesn't care. He sets forth toward the enemy lines. Immediately, he is showered by cannons and bullets, but he keeps pushing. Finally, he gets to the ammo, loads it up on his horse, and comes back triumphantly. However, with this success, Déon makes de Guerchy look like a coward, and this is something that will not be forgotten. Eventually, the war ends, and the King of France decorates Déon as the best French officer of the conflict. But with the end of the war comes a treaty of peace with the enemy. And unfortunately, France has lost the war, so they don't exactly have the upper hand in the negotiations. But once more, Louis XV relies on Déon to save the day. As a result, Déon becomes a diplomat. He is sent to London for the negotiations. His main goal is to keep the French West Indies under the control of France. These islands are responsible for the production of sugar for the entire country. And during this period of history, the sugar industry is vital for a French economy that's already struggling a lot. Obviously, the English would love to have these islands for themselves. And because they won the war, there isn't much Déon can actually say to prevent the English from getting what they want. On top of this, Lord Stormont, the Englishman he faces, is an experienced and tough negotiator. Despite Déon's legendary charisma, he struggles to find a way to make the peace treaty more favorable to France. But you begin to know Déon. He's not the kind of guy to give up so easily. So instead of trying to convince Lord Stormont, he earns his sympathy. Now that Lord Stormont feels more comfortable, Déon pours punch into the Englishman's cup. They both start drinking, but Déon drinks much more carefully than Lord Stormont. And every time Lord Stormont's cup gets half empty, Déon pours more punch into it. Also, Déon keeps joking about random subjects to take the Englishman's attention away from all the alcohol he is consuming. But Lord Stormont isn't that naive. Even drunk, he doesn't intend to be any nicer in the negotiations. Except the punch is actually much stronger than he thought. If you've ever drunk punch or some kind of cocktail, you know what I'm talking about. The sweeter the drink, the less you can taste the alcohol. And that sneaky Déon supercharged the punch with sugar. And now, the poor Lord Stormont isn't just drunk, he literally blacks out. And now, Déon can freely look into the Englishman's briefcase. Bingo, he finds some top secret documents listing everything England is and isn't okay with negotiating. Déon quickly makes a copy of the confidential document and sends it to France. As a result, France manages to keep the West Indies and negotiate a great outcome given the circumstances. For his work, Déon receives the highest military decoration possible. But more importantly, he will stay in London because he is promoted to be the leader of the French embassy in England. At only 35 years old, he is well on his way to being one of the most important and influential people in the world. However, This unfortunately marks the peak of his career, and from here, everything will start to go downhill. But he doesn't know it yet. And for now, Deong enjoys his new job of ambassador. But while he acts as a diplomat in broad daylight, he still remains a spy under the direct supervision of the king. And Louis XV wants to get his revenge against England. For that, he entrusts Deong with the most important mission of them all. Deong must prepare the invasion of England. More specifically, his task is to gather as much information as possible to carefully plan the landing of French troops on the coast of England. So Deong gets to work. He uses his new influence and money as an ambassador to impress and blend in more easily with the high nobility. For that, he organizes luxurious parties at the embassy that many English nobles attend. As usual, he uses his charisma and charming personality to extract useful information. And the English do not suspect anything. This allows Deong to make even more meticulous preparations for the invasion. Everything is going perfectly. That is, until he receives a letter from Louis XV asking him to stop with the outrageous policies. You see, the Kingdom of France is facing a financial crisis, and they cannot afford to keep paying for such lavish festivities. However, Deong isn't happy with the tone of the letter. Sure, he enjoys the parties, but it's not reckless spending. It's all to accomplish his mission. So he ignores the warning. Eventually, the king has no choice but to retrograde Deong to the role of ambassador's assistant. And guess who's been chosen to replace him in the role of the main ambassador? De Guerchy, the guy Deong made look like a coward during the war. I told you he'd be back. And right away, when de Guerchy arrives in London, he doesn't hide his feelings. De Guerchy reminds Deong that he is simply a little noble from the countryside and that he better learn to behave accordingly. In fact, de Guerchy tells him that he should never have been an ambassador to begin with. Deong is fuming. But this humiliation is only the beginning of his problems. Soon, Deong realizes that de Guerchy isn't only a coward, but also a lazy and incompetent asshole. Basically, de Guerchy enjoys all the fun social gatherings while giving all the actual work to Deong. The knight tries to tolerate the situation, but he quickly turns sour. He has done so much for France, and that's what he gets in return? Nah. He cannot allow this bad joke to continue any longer. So he decides to leverage the work he has done in regards to the preparations for the invasion. Right now, he is the only one in possession of all these documents, and no one else knows where they are. Of course, de Guerchy asks to see them, but Deong refuses to share them. But when it gets serious is when Deong refuses to share the documents even with the king. Worse, Deong actually threatens Louis XV to send these documents to the English if he doesn't get a huge amount of money. This is a very dangerous game. A little noble blackmailing the King of France and talking about betraying the kingdom could easily lead to death. But at the same time, if he actually sent the invasion plans to England, it could literally trigger another war. However, Deong doesn't actually intend to become a traitor. His one and only goal has always been to be the most powerful and influential French noble he can be. He's not going to get there by betraying his king. In the meantime, Deong has been busy using his influence to turn public opinion against de Guerchy. In the end, the English people end up hating de Guerchy so much that he cannot leave the embassy without Englishmen throwing rocks at him in the streets. As a result, he is forced to go back to France. So I guess it's a victory for Deong? Well, not really. Remember that de Guerchy is a high noble, while Deong is only a knight. What it means is that although the general public has sided with Deong, he has lost the support of the high nobility. With such shocking behavior, he has destroyed his reputation among the elite. As a diplomat, Deon's career is over. So all he can do is to remain a spy in London. But he now lives completely in the shadow. His former glory is no more. He, who loves to shine and be the center of attention, cannot tolerate such an outcome. He's desperate to get back into the light. And to achieve this, he is willing to do everything, even to reveal his biggest secret. As it turns out, rumors are spreading that Deon might actually be a woman. And at the origin of this rumor is none other than Deon himself. Or should I say herself? The knight wants to draw the interest of the public, and this is working even better than expected. On purpose, Deon remains quiet and doesn't confirm nor deny the rumor. Now, the city is in a frenzy. In fact, the biological sex of Deon becomes the most popular talking point in London. People argue and even bet huge amounts of money on whether or not Deon is a woman. And after a few months, the people demand to know the truth. There is so much money on the table that a public trial is organized to find out once and for all if Deon is a man or a woman. But on the day of the trial, the key player is nowhere to be found. In the absence of Deon, the judge is forced to take a guess. So it is decided that in regard to the English law, Deon officially becomes a woman. This is a big deal, and when it arrives to the ears of the nobles in Versailles, everyone is shocked. If it's true, it means that Deon has misled the King of France and pretty much the entire kingdom for decades. So Louis XV sends Beaumarchais, a high noble, to London. Beaumarchais' mission is to learn the truth. And when he finally meets with Deon, the knight doesn't try to hide anything. She quickly admits that she is obviously a woman. She bursts into tears in front of a confused Beaumarchais. Deon's cries become louder as she tells him that she was forced into playing the role of a man her entire life. This wasn't a choice, and she didn't mean to deceive anyone. She just wanted to prove that she was able to do everything a man could do. And she knew she wouldn't get this chance as a woman. However, Beaumarchais remains impassive in front of this demonstration of emotions. Deon can see the suspicious look Beaumarchais gives her. So she grabs the noble's hand and puts it on her crotch. Beaumarchais is stunned by what just happened. But now, there is no doubt. Deon is indeed a woman. Beaumarchais quickly apologizes and turns more friendly and empathic toward Deon. But his mission is far from over. You see, the true reason he came to see Deon is to retrieve the infamous invasion documents the knight is hiding. Obviously, Deon is aware of Beaumarchais' real intentions, and she fully intends to negotiate the most advantageous conditions possible before returning these documents. And thus begins a mind game between the two intellectuals that will last for years. Deon tries to seduce Beaumarchais while Beaumarchais pretends to go along with it. They publicly present themselves as a couple. They even attend parties with English nobles together. They go as far as announcing their engagement. But there is no marriage coming up, and for a good reason. It's all an act. They're both trying to gain each other's trust and sympathy. Deon does it so she can get a lot of money in exchange for giving away the invasion documents. And Beaumarchais does it so Deon accepts a more reasonable offer. But time is running in Beaumarchais' favor. The truth is that Deon is almost completely out of money. And eventually she has no choice but to accept an offer far below what she wanted. But to be fair, it's still pretty good. I mean, she will receive a very decent monthly income for the rest of her life. However, she is bitter she couldn't win Beaumarchais over. So forget about the love letters. She now accuses him publicly of being some kind of sexual predator addicted to prostitutes. But no one cares. And when Deon finally comes back to Paris, she isn't a spy anymore. She isn't a diplomat either, nor a soldier. So what is she? Well, for the King of France, she is now a woman, which implies that she has to behave like one. So for months, Deon is forced to train and learn the etiquette of how to carry herself as a quote-unquote proper woman. But she despises having to submit to such instruction. All her life, she has proven she was as capable as any other man. So why does she need to act like an ordinary court lady all of a sudden? Besides, she argues that women deserve equal rights and opportunities as men. She says that if women received the same education as men, they would prove to be no less competent. Deon was surely in advance for her time, and probably a little too much in advance. Her behavior was once again very shocking for high society, and she kinda got ostracized because of it. However, a new war has started between France and England. And this time, it's a bit different. The American colonies are fighting for their independence against the British. France has now entered the conflict to support the Americans, and Deon wants to participate in the war. She has already proven her value on the battlefield, and this conflict is the perfect opportunity to regain her former glory. But now that she is known as a woman, she is forbidden from joining the army. It's unthinkable for any military officer to allow a woman on the battlefield. But Deon insists and even walks around Versailles in her military uniform. But as a result of her repeated provocations, she is exiled from Paris. So she has to go back to Tonnerre, the little town in the countryside where she is originally from. But after 7 long years, she is bored to death. Still unable to go back to Paris, she instead decides to return to London. But unfortunately, she is looking for a former glory she can never retrieve, and her biological sex has nothing to do with it. Indeed, soon after she arrives in England, the revolution happens in France. So the French king and many nobles are beheaded, while the rest of the nobles are forced to run away from the country. But at first, Deon doesn't worry, and surprisingly, she even supports the revolution. Although she is a noble herself, she is the lowest level of them all, so she kind of feels the same way as the general population. She also believes that the revolution will bring more opportunities to women. But although she supports the revolution doesn't support her. Like any other noble, she is stripped of her income, and everything she owns becomes property of the new French government. Ruined, and with no possibility to ever go back to France because of her noble status, she is forced to find a way to earn money in England. But Deon has proven to be resourceful. In her youth, Deon was actually an amazing fencer, and it turns out that she hasn't lost her talent. So she participates in fencing tournaments. Her opponents are almost all men, and not just random men, but some of the best fencers of England. Yet, she manages to win almost every time in front of a growing crowd. And to attract even more spectators, she wears makeup and she dresses in traditional women's clothes. However, this isn't the kind of life Deon ever wanted. She has become a sort of entertainer. People go to see her like they would go to the circus. It's actually a very sad end for Deon, who always dreamed about becoming a highly respected noble. After that, she lives a few more years before dying poor and forgotten by everyone. But not without dropping one last bombshell. Deon was never a woman. Yeah, you heard that right. Deon was actually a man all along. His body is 100% the body of a male. In his will, he also presents himself as a man. And if you still had any doubts, his baptism certificate also confirms that Deon was a male. At the time of his death, he had been living as a woman for decades. He managed to fool everyone. But the problem is that he also fooled himself. He tried to play a mind game where he'd use the doubts people originally had about his sex to gain attention and have people talk about him again. And everyone fell for it. But by doing so, he locked himself into the role of a woman. And he couldn't just come up and say, "Sorry guys, I'm actually a man," without looking like an absolute fool. Although at times he had fun pretending to be a woman, he understood way too late that this was a terrible mistake. However, you could also say that he got lucky because without passing for a woman, he might have stayed in Paris and gotten beheaded during the revolution. In the end, Deon was playing a game where losing was the only outcome possible. But you know who else fooled everyone? Frédéric Bourdin, an impostor who pretended to be a missing child for many years, until one day he decided to take it one step too far. Click on the video on your screen right now to watch his story next.